I had just poured my second cup of coffee that Tuesday morning, savoring the quiet of my kitchen after 30 years of chaos at the children's hospital, when my phone rang. Amanda's voice came through sharp and demanding before I could even say hello. "I'm dropping off the 4 kids today. You don't do anything anymore, so you can watch them while I go to Cabo with my girlfriends for 2 weeks. Pack their bags. I'll be there in an hour." The audacity hit me like a slap. I smiled quietly, hung up the phone, and knew exactly what I had to do. For 3 decades, I had dedicated my life to healing sick children at Memorial Children's Hospital. Double shifts became my norm. Holidays were spent comforting frightened families, and my own needs always came second to the little patients who needed me. When I finally retired at 67, my colleagues threw me a beautiful farewell party, praising my dedication and sacrifice. I had dreams for this new chapter of my life, tending to the garden I had neglected for years, reading the stack of novels gathering dust on my nightstand, and volunteering at the local animal shelter where abandoned pets needed the same kind of gentle care I had given to children. My relationship with my son David had always been strong, even through the challenges of his military career. He was currently deployed in Germany, stationed at Ramstein Air Base, where communication was often difficult due to training exercises and time differences. David had married Amanda 5 years ago, and I had tried my best to welcome her into our family with open arms. However, over the years, I began noticing subtle signs of her sense of entitlement. She would make comments about my easy life as a nurse, despite knowing the emotional and physical toll of my work. She expected free babysitting whenever it suited her schedule, never asking if I was available, just announcing when she would drop the children off. I had always been generous with my time and resources, believing that families should support each other through thick and thin. When Amanda needed help, I provided it without complaint, thinking it was what any loving grandmother would do. But something about this morning's call felt different. There was a coldness in her voice, a complete disregard for my feelings or plans. After hanging up, I immediately tried to reach David at his base. The communications officer informed me that his unit was participating in a 10-day field training exercise with limited contact availability. Frustrated but determined to understand the situation, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I opened my laptop and checked Amanda's social media accounts, something I rarely did but felt compelled to do now. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Amanda's Instagram and Facebook were filled with posts from the past 3 weeks showing her excitement about an upcoming trip to Cabo San Lucas. She had tagged expensive beachfront resort, posted photos of bikinis she had purchased, and shared countdown posts about her well-deserved vacation. The timestamps showed she had been planning this trip for months, not the spontaneous getaway she had implied on the phone. But the most shocking discovery came when I scrolled through her recent posts and comments. Amanda had been telling people for weeks that David's mom volunteered to watch the kids while I take a little break. She had even posted in a military wives group asking for vacation tips, mentioning how lucky she was to have such a willing mother-in-law. The comments from other wives congratulating her on having such supportive family made my stomach turn. This was no last-minute request. This was a calculated manipulation that had been in the works for months. Amanda had never intended to ask my permission because she had already decided I would comply. She had been spreading the narrative that I had eagerly volunteered for this responsibility, making it nearly impossible for me to refuse without looking like I was going back on my word. The final piece of evidence came when I called the children's school to inquire about their attendance policies. The secretary cheerfully informed me that Amanda had already updated their emergency contact information, listing me as the primary contact for the next 2 weeks, and informing them that the children would be staying with their grandmother during their mother's absence. Amanda had covered all her bases, trapping me in a web of her own making. As I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of Amanda's deception, I realized that this was not just about babysitting. This was about respect, boundaries, and the kind of person I was going to allow myself to become in my retirement years. I had spent my career advocating for children who could not speak for themselves, and now I found myself in a position where I needed to advocate for my own worth and dignity. At exactly 11:30 that morning, I heard car doors slamming in my driveway. Through my front window, I watched Amanda emerge from her silver SUV, immediately beginning to unload suitcases with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. 4 children climbed out of the vehicle. The 6-year-old twins, Jake and Emma, 10-year-old Sophie, and 12-year-old Marcus. They all looked uncomfortable and uncertain, glancing between their mother and my house with expressions that broke my heart. Amanda marched up to my front door, carrying 2 large suitcases, with the children trailing behind her, each carrying their own smaller bags. When I opened the door, she pushed past me without ceremony, dropping the luggage in my foyer with a heavy thud. "Okay, kids, be good for Grandma Beth," she said without looking at any of them. "Remember what I told you about not being too much trouble." I watched in amazement as Amanda continued to bring in suitcase after suitcase, 7 in total for a 2-week stay. There were no instructions about medications, no information about food allergies, no schedules for school activities or doctor appointments. When I attempted to ask about these practical matters, Amanda waved me off dismissively. "Don't let them eat too much junk food," she said, checking her phone while she spoke. "But I didn't have time to buy groceries, so you'll need to figure that out. Jake needs his inhaler if he gets wheezy, but I think it's in one of his bags somewhere. Sophie has a math test next week, but she should be fine. Marcus can help with the little ones if you need him to." I tried to interject, to explain that I had never actually agreed to this arrangement, but Amanda was already pulling her car keys from her purse. "Look, Beth," she said, using a tone I might use with a particularly difficult child. "Family helps family. I've been stressed out with David being deployed, and I really need this break. Don't be selfish about this. The kids love spending time with you, and it's not like you have anything else going on now that you're retired." The casual cruelty of that last comment hit me like a physical blow. 30 years of serving others, of sacrificing my own comfort for the well-being of children, reduced to nothing else going on. I opened my mouth to respond, but Amanda was already heading toward the door. "I'll call when I land," she called over her shoulder, "but I'm planning to really disconnect and recharge, so don't expect to hear from me much. You understand?" And with that, she was gone, leaving me standing in my foyer with 4 children and 7 suitcases, feeling like I had just been hit by a tornado. The children stood in awkward silence, clearly embarrassed by their mother's behavior. Marcus, the oldest, stepped forward first. "Grandma Beth, we're really sorry about this," he said quietly. "We didn't know Mom never asked you. We thought you wanted us to come stay with you." Little Emma, one of the twins, began to cry softly. "Mommy said we weren't supposed to be burdens," she whispered. "But we don't want to make you sad or tired." I knelt down to Emma's level, my heart breaking for these innocent children who were as much victims of their mother's manipulation as I was. "Sweetheart, you are never a burden to me," I said, pulling her into a gentle hug. "I love you all very much, and we're going to figure this out together." But as I comforted Emma, I realized the full scope of Amanda's emotional manipulation. She had not only trapped me into providing free childcare, but she had also poisoned the children's understanding of their relationship with me. Later, as we sorted through their belongings, Emma revealed more of what Amanda had told them during the car ride over. "Mommy said you're probably lonely and boring now that you don't work anymore," Emma said innocently, "and that having kids around would make you feel useful again. She said that's why you asked us to come stay with you, because you needed something to do." The calculated cruelty of using these innocent children as unwitting participants in her manipulation scheme made me angrier than I had been in years. Amanda had not only disrespected me, but she had also used her own children as weapons in her emotional warfare, teaching them to view relationships as transactions and family love as conditional based on usefulness. As I helped the children settle into the guest bedrooms and tried to make sense of the chaos Amanda had left behind, I made a decision. This was not just about standing up for myself anymore. This was about protecting these 4 beautiful children from learning that love and manipulation were the same thing. This was about teaching them that family relationships should be built on respect, honesty, and genuine care, not on exploitation and entitlement. I was going to teach Amanda a lesson she would never forget. But more importantly, I was going to show these children what real love and stability looked like. Over the next 3 days, as I settled into a routine with the children, I began to see the true scope of the problem. These were not just kids dropped off for an inconvenient babysitting session. These were children who had been starved of attention, structure, and genuine care for far longer than I had realized. Marcus, at 12, had assumed responsibilities that no child his age should bear. He knew everyone's schedules by heart, reminded Sophie about homework, and instinctively helped the twins with everything from tying shoes to brushing teeth. When I asked him about this, he shrugged with a maturity that broke my heart. "Mom's always busy with her friends or her gym stuff," he explained matter-of-factly. "Someone has to make sure everyone's okay. Dad always says we need to look out for each other when he's deployed." Sophie, the 10-year-old, revealed that she was failing mathematics because nobody at home helped her with homework. "Mom says she's not good at math either, so she can't help me," Sophie told me as we worked through her assignment together. "She usually just tells me to ask Marcus, but he's got his own homework to do." The twins, Jake and Emma, shared stories that made my nursing instincts scream with concern. They often ate cereal or peanut butter sandwiches for dinner when Amanda went out with friends, which happened 3 or 4 nights each week. Jake's inhaler had been empty for 2 weeks, but Amanda kept forgetting to get it refilled. Emma had been complaining of stomachaches for months, but no one had taken her to see a doctor. As a retired pediatric nurse, I recognized the signs immediately. These children were not being neglected in the dramatic ways that make headlines, but they were experiencing a slow erosion of care that was just as damaging. They had learned to minimize their needs, to avoid bothering their mother, and to find ways to survive rather than thrive. I began making phone calls to understand the full picture. Amanda's neighbor, Carol, was surprisingly forthcoming when I called to inquire about emergency contacts. "Oh, honey," Carol said with a sigh, "Amanda drops those kids off with anyone who'll take them. She's asked me to watch them overnight at least 6 times this year, always with some excuse about emergencies or important appointments. Last month, she left them with the teenager next door while she went to a wine tasting event." The school secretary was equally revealing when I called to update some information. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm so glad you called," she said warmly. "We've been concerned about Sophie's academic performance, and we've tried to reach Mrs. Amanda several times about parent-teacher conferences. She never returns our calls, and when she does come to school events, she seems distracted and in a hurry. But the most damning information came when I finally managed to reach David through an emergency Red Cross message. His voice crackled through the poor connection, but his shock was crystal clear. "What trip to Cabo?" he asked, confusion evident in his tone. "Amanda told me you specifically asked to have the kids for 2 weeks because you were feeling lonely after retirement and wanted to bond with them. She said it was your idea, and that you were excited about it." My hands trembled as I realized the full scope of Amanda's deception. She had been playing both sides, telling David that I had requested this time with the children, while simultaneously treating me like an unpaid babysitter who had no choice in the matter. She had manipulated both of us, using our love for the children and each other as weapons in her scheme. "David," I said carefully, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. I never asked to take the children. Amanda called me 1 hour before dropping them off and told me I was watching them while she went on vacation. She never asked permission, never discussed it with me, and has been planning this trip for months." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that I thought we had been disconnected. When David finally spoke, his voice was tight with controlled anger. "Beth, there's something else I need to tell you," he said slowly. "Last month, I noticed that $3,000 was withdrawn from our joint account. When I asked Amanda about it, she said it was for emergency car repairs and some medical bills for the kids. If she's been planning this vacation for months, the pieces were falling into place, creating a picture that was even worse than I had initially suspected. Amanda had not only manipulated family relationships and exploited her children's needs, but she had also been stealing money from her deployed husband to fund her lifestyle. She had been lying to everyone, her husband, her children, her in-laws, even her neighbors, to create a web of deception that allowed her to live without accountability or consequence. That evening, as I tucked the children into bed and listened to their prayers, I made a decision. This was no longer just about teaching Amanda a lesson about respect and boundaries. This was about protecting these children from a pattern of neglect and manipulation that could damage them for the rest of their lives. This was about giving David the truth he needed to make informed decisions about his family's future. And this was about showing Amanda that her actions had consequences, especially when they involved the welfare of innocent children and the trust of people who loved her. The next morning, while the children worked on their homework at my kitchen table, a routine that was clearly new to them, but which they embraced eagerly, I began making the phone calls that would unravel Amanda's web of lies completely. My first call was to Patricia, Amanda's mother, whom I had met only a handful of times at family gatherings. Patricia lived in Phoenix, Arizona, and had seemed like a reasonable, caring woman, though I had always sensed some tension between her and Amanda. "Beth, what a surprise to hear from you," Patricia said when she answered. "How are you enjoying retirement?" "Actually, Patricia, I'm calling about Amanda and the children," I began carefully. "I wanted to ask you about some concerns I've been having." The change in Patricia's tone was immediate and telling. "Oh no," she said with a heavy sigh. "What has she done now?" That simple question opened floodgates. Patricia revealed that 6 months ago, she had been forced to cut Amanda off financially after discovering a pattern of manipulation and lies. Amanda had borrowed money for various emergencies that turned out to be fabrications, had used guilt and emotional manipulation to extract funds from family members, and had defaulted on multiple loans that family members had co-signed. "I love my daughter," Patricia said with evident pain, "but I finally realized that giving her money was not helping her. It was enabling her to avoid taking responsibility for her choices. When I told her I wouldn't lend her any more money, she accused me of being selfish and unsupportive. She hasn't spoken to me since, except to send me a text last month demanding that I send money for Jake's birthday party." Patricia went on to explain that Amanda had burned bridges with virtually every member of her family through similar patterns of exploitation. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends had all experienced Amanda's particular brand of emotional manipulation, where genuine care and concern were met with demands, entitlement, and accusations of selfishness when boundaries were established. "The thing that breaks my heart most," Patricia continued, "is that she's teaching those beautiful children that relationships are about what you can get from people rather than what you can give. They're learning that love comes with conditions and expectations rather than being freely given." My next series of phone calls was to other military wives in David's unit, women whose husbands were deployed alongside my son. Through the military family network, I was able to connect with several wives who knew Amanda socially. The picture that emerged was even more disturbing than I had anticipated. Sarah, the wife of David's commanding officer, was particularly forthcoming. "Beth, I'm so glad you called," she said. "Several of us have been concerned about Amanda's behavior, but we didn't know how to address it without potentially causing problems for David's career." Sarah explained that Amanda had been spreading stories throughout the military community about my desperation for grandchildren and my loneliness in retirement. She had convinced other wives that I had been begging to take the children, portraying herself as a generous daughter-in-law who was graciously allowing me to feel needed and useful. "She's also been playing the victim," Sarah continued, "telling everyone how difficult it is to be married to a military man and how she gets no support from family. She's painted you as overbearing and intrusive, while simultaneously claiming that you're always volunteering to help because you have nothing else to do." But the most shocking revelation came from Jennifer, another military wife who had known Amanda longer than the others. Jennifer revealed that Amanda had been borrowing money from various military wives over the past year, always with sob stories about emergency expenses or David's pay being delayed. She had taken advantage of the tight-knit, supportive nature of the military community to exploit the very people who were trying to help her. "Last month, she borrowed $200 from me for Emma's supposed dental emergency," Jennifer said. "But then I saw Emma at the commissary, and when I asked about her tooth, Emma looked confused and said she hadn't been to a dentist in over a year. The pattern was becoming clear. Amanda had been systematically exploiting every relationship in her life, using emotional manipulation, lies, and fabricated emergencies to extract money, services, and sympathy from people who genuinely cared about her and her family. She had weaponized the natural compassion and generosity of military families, retired grandparents, and concerned neighbors to fund a lifestyle she could not otherwise afford. As I spent the afternoon helping Sophie with her mathematics homework and watching Jake and Emma play peacefully in my backyard, I realized that these children had been living in an environment of constant instability and deception. They had learned to minimize their needs because expressing them might trigger their mother's anger or complaints about being burdened. They had learned that asking for help was selfish, that expecting care and attention was unreasonable, and that their worth was measured by how little trouble they caused. But over the past few days, I had watched them transform. With consistent meals, regular bedtimes, help with homework, and genuine attention to their interests and concerns, they were becoming the confident, happy children they were meant to be. Marcus had started laughing more and worrying less. Sophie was excited about mathematics for the first time in months. The twins were sleeping through the night, without the anxiety stomachaches that Emma had been experiencing at home. That evening, I made one final phone call that would change everything. I called David's base and requested another emergency communication session. This time, I had a very different conversation to have with my son. "David," I said when the connection was established, "I need you to request emergency leave immediately. Your wife has been lying to both of us, stealing money from your accounts, and neglecting the children. I have evidence, witness statements, and documentation. Your family is in crisis, and you need to come home." The determination in my voice must have convinced him, because David's response was immediate. "I'll submit the paperwork tonight. I should be able to fly out within 48 hours. "Good," I said. "And David? When you get home, prepare yourself for some very difficult truths. Your children are safe with me, but there are things you need to know about what's been happening while you've been deployed." As I hung up the phone, I felt a mixture of sadness and determination. I was sad that it had come to this, that these innocent children had been caught in their mother's web of deception and manipulation, but I was determined to make sure that Amanda's actions finally had consequences and that these children would learn what real love and stability could look like. The lesson I was about to teach Amanda would be unlike anything she had ever experienced. For the first time in her life, she was going to face the truth about her behavior and its impact on the people who loved her most. With David's emergency leave approved and his arrival scheduled for the following evening, I knew I had less than 24 hours to prepare for what would undoubtedly be the most important confrontation of my family's life. This was not going to be an emotional outburst or a heated argument. This was going to be a carefully orchestrated presentation of facts that would leave no room for Amanda's usual manipulation tactics. My first call was to Patricia in Phoenix. After our previous conversation, I knew she would be a crucial ally in what was to come. "Patricia, I need your help," I said without preamble. "David is flying home tomorrow, and we're going to confront Amanda when she returns from her vacation. I need you to gather any evidence you have of Amanda's financial manipulation and fraudulent behavior." Patricia's response was immediate and determined. "I've been waiting for this moment for months," she said. "I have bank statements, copies of bounced checks, text messages, and documentation of every loan she defaulted on. I also have the paperwork from the credit card she convinced me to co-sign that she maxed out and never paid. She destroyed my credit score, and I've been working with a financial counselor to repair the damage. Can you fly out here?" I asked. "I think Amanda needs to face the consequences of her actions with her own family present, not just David's family." "I'll book a flight today," Patricia replied without hesitation. "It's time my daughter learned that her choices have consequences that extend far beyond her own convenience." My next call was to my family attorney, Robert Chen, who had handled my retirement planning and estate documentation. Robert had been practicing family law for over 20 years and I knew he would provide the legal perspective we needed. "Robert, I need an emergency consultation about grandparents' rights and child welfare documentation," I said. "My daughter-in-law has been neglecting my grandchildren, and I need to understand what legal protections might be available." Robert agreed to meet with me that afternoon, and when I presented him with the evidence I had gathered, photos of the empty refrigerator Amanda had left, the children's poorly maintained clothing, documentation of missed medical appointments, and failing grades, his expression grew increasingly serious. "Beth, what you're describing could constitute child neglect under state law," he said carefully. "The pattern of leaving children with inadequate supervision, failing to provide proper medical care, and using children as pawns in adult conflicts are all concerning from a legal standpoint. If David chooses to pursue divorce, this documentation could be crucial in custody determinations." Robert also explained the process for reporting suspected child neglect to social services if necessary, though he emphasized that having a concerned father return from deployment to address the situation would likely be the preferred outcome for everyone involved. Meanwhile, I reached out to several of my former colleagues from the Children's Hospital. Nurse practitioners and social workers who had worked with me for years offered to provide professional perspectives on the behavioral and emotional signs I had observed in the children. Their professional opinions, documented in writing, would carry significant weight if legal intervention became necessary. But the most important preparation involved the children themselves. I knew that they would likely be present when Amanda returned, and I wanted to prepare them for what might be a difficult confrontation, without frightening them or asking them to choose sides between their parents. "Kids, I want to talk with you about something important," I said as we gathered in my living room after dinner. "Your dad is coming home tomorrow because there are some grown-up problems that need to be discussed. Whatever happens, I want you to know that you are loved, you are safe, and none of this is your fault." Marcus, with his 12-year-old wisdom, looked at me seriously. "Is this about Mom leaving us here without asking you?" he asked. I was careful with my response. "It's about making sure that everyone in our family treats each other with respect and honesty," I said. "Your dad and I need to have some conversations with your mom about how our family works together." I spent time with each child individually, reinforcing their worth and helping them understand that the chaos and inconsistency they had been living with was not normal or acceptable. I wanted them to have a clear understanding of what healthy family relationships looked like before they were confronted with the dysfunction they had been living with. That evening, I created a comprehensive portfolio of evidence that told the complete story of Amanda's deception and its impact on the children. Photos, witness statements, financial records provided by Patricia, school documentation, medical records showing missed appointments and delayed care, to everything, was organized chronologically to show the pattern of neglect and manipulation that had been escalating over months. I also prepared a detailed log of the children's condition when they arrived versus their improvement over the past few days. Weight gain from regular meals, improved sleep patterns, completion of homework assignments, engagement in activities, reduction in anxiety behaviors. The contrast was stark and undeniable. As I worked late into the night preparing for Amanda's return, I received an unexpected phone call that would add one final piece to the puzzle I was assembling. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Brian Williams. I'm a friend of David's from his unit. I'm stationed stateside, and I've been trying to reach you because I have some information I think David needs to know." Brian explained that he lived in the same city where Amanda had gone for her supposed vacation with girlfriends. Through social media and mutual acquaintances, he had discovered that Amanda's trip was not what she had claimed. "Ma'am, she's not here with girlfriends. She's here with a man, her personal trainer from back home. They've been posting photos together all week, and it's pretty clear this is a romantic getaway, not a girls' trip." I took some photos because I thought David should know what's really going on. The final piece of Amanda's deception fell into place. She had not only stolen money from her deployed husband, neglected her children, and manipulated her family, she had also been having an affair. The vacation she had demanded free babysitting for was actually a romantic getaway with another man, funded by money stolen from David's military pay. As I hung up the phone, I felt a mixture of sadness for David and determination to make sure Amanda faced the full consequences of her choices. Tomorrow would bring a reckoning that Amanda had never expected, and for the first time in her adult life, she would discover that her actions had consequences that could not be manipulated, charmed, or lied away. The children were finally going to see what it looked like when adults fought for their well-being rather than using them as pawns in selfish games. David was going to learn the truth about what had been happening to his family while he served his country. And Amanda was going to discover that kindness and generosity were not the same thing as weakness and gullibility. David arrived at my house at 6:30 that Thursday evening, still wearing his military uniform and carrying a single duffel bag. The exhaustion in his eyes spoke of more than just the long flight from Germany. It was the weariness of a man who was beginning to understand that his life was not what he thought it was. The children's reunion with their father was both heartbreaking and beautiful. They clung to him with a desperation that spoke volumes about the stability they had been craving. Marcus immediately began telling David about school projects he had completed with my help. Sophie proudly showed off her improved mathematics homework, and the twins chattered excitedly about the bedtime stories I had been reading to them. "Dad, Grandma Beth makes us breakfast every morning," Emma said with wonder, as if this were an extraordinary luxury rather than basic parental care. David's expression grew darker as he processed what his children were telling him, not through their words, but through their obvious relief at having experienced consistent care and attention. He pulled me aside while Patricia, who had arrived that afternoon, helped the children with their baths. "Beth, tell me everything," he said quietly. "And don't spare my feelings. I need to understand what's been happening to my family." For the next 2 hours, David listened as Patricia and I presented the evidence we had compiled. Financial records showing Amanda's theft and fraud, witness statements from neighbors and other military wives, documentation of the children's neglect, and photographic evidence of Amanda's affair, piece by piece. We dismantled the fiction that Amanda had constructed around her life. David's military training served him well during this presentation. He asked questions, examined documents, and processed information with the methodical approach of someone accustomed to making life or death decisions based on accurate intelligence. But I could see the personal cost of each revelation in his eyes. "How long has this been going on?" he asked finally. "Based on what Patricia and I have discovered, at least 18 months, I replied. "Probably longer, but the evidence we have goes back that far." David nodded slowly. "So essentially, the entire time I've been deployed, Amanda has been systematically lying to me about every aspect of our family's life." "Yes," I said simply. "And David, there's something else you need to know. Brian Williams called yesterday. Amanda is not in Cabo with girlfriends. She's there with her personal trainer. It's a romantic getaway that she funded with money stolen from your joint account." The silence that followed stretched for several minutes. David stared out my kitchen window at his children playing in the backyard under Patricia's supervision, and I could see him processing not just the betrayal, but the implications for everything he thought he knew about his marriage and family. "What do you recommend we do?" he asked finally. "We wait for her to come home," I said, "and then we present her with the truth and the consequences of her choices." Amanda's return was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. She had sent one brief text message during her vacation, a photo of herself on a beach, with the caption, "Much needed relaxation," but had otherwise maintained radio silence, just as she had promised. On Saturday morning, our team was assembled in my living room. David sat in his military uniform, having deliberately chosen to dress in a way that emphasized his service and sacrifice. Patricia had organized her financial documents chronologically, creating a timeline of Amanda's fraudulent behavior that stretched back over 2 years. Robert, my attorney, was present to explain legal options and consequences, and I had prepared a comprehensive presentation about the children's condition and the improvements they had shown with consistent care. At 2:15 that afternoon, we heard Amanda's car in the driveway. Through the window, we watched her emerge from a taxi looking tanned and relaxed, pulling her luggage behind her with the confident air of someone who expected to simply collect her children and resume her normal routine. When she walked through my front door, Her expression immediately shifted from confidence to confusion. She had expected to find me alone with her children, not facing a room full of serious adults who had clearly been waiting for her arrival. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice taking on the defensive tone I had learned to recognize as her default when challenged. "Amanda, please sit down," David said in his military command voice. "We need to have a conversation." "David? What are you doing here? You're not supposed to be back for 2 months." Amanda's attempt at casual surprise was undermined by the obvious panic in her eyes. "I received emergency leave," David replied evenly, "because my wife has been lying to me about every aspect of our family's life for at least 18 months. What followed was a systematic dismantling of Amanda's web of deceptions. David presented the financial evidence of her theft and fraud. Patricia confronted her with the pattern of manipulation and exploitation that had destroyed relationships with her entire extended family. I shared documentation of the children's neglect and the improvements they had shown with proper care. But the final blow came when David placed printed photos on the coffee table. Images that Brian had taken of Amanda and her trainer in romantic embraces on the beaches of Cabo. "You told me you were going to Cabo with girlfriends for some much-needed relaxation," David said quietly. "You told my mother that she was providing free babysitting so you could have a girls' trip. You told our children that Grandma Beth volunteered to take them because she was lonely." Every single word was a lie. Amanda's response was exactly what I had expected based on her pattern of behavior. First came denial. The photos were misleading. The financial evidence was misunderstood. The children's accounts were exaggerated. When denial failed, she shifted to justification. David's deployment had been hard on her. She deserved some happiness. Everyone was being unreasonable and unsupportive. But when justification failed to gain traction with an audience armed with facts rather than emotions, Amanda's mask finally slipped completely. The manipulative, entitled woman I had been dealing with disappeared, replaced by someone I barely recognized. "Fine," she screamed, her voice reaching a pitch that brought the children running from the backyard. "You want to know the truth? I never wanted kids in the first place. I only got pregnant to make sure David would marry me and give me financial security. I've been miserable pretending to be a mother and a military wife, and I deserve to have some happiness." The children stood frozen in my doorway, hearing their mother's true feelings about them spoken aloud for the first time. The damage of that moment would require years of healing, but it also provided a moment of clarity that no amount of manipulation could ever undo. "And yes, I've been seeing Trevor," Amanda continued, referring to her trainer. "He actually appreciates me and makes me feel valued, unlike all of you who just expect me to sacrifice everything for your convenience." David's military training prevented him from responding, with the emotion I could see building behind his controlled expression. Instead, he turned to Robert, my attorney. "What are our legal options?" he asked. Robert's response was comprehensive and sobering. Amanda faced potential criminal charges for financial fraud and identity theft. She would lose custody of the children based on documented neglect and abandonment. The military would likely pursue charges related to theft of military pay and benefits. And her affair, documented during David's deployment, would impact any divorce settlement significantly. As the legal consequences mounted around her, Amanda's bravado finally crumbled. She began to cry, not the manipulative tears I had seen her use before, but the genuine breakdown of someone who was finally facing the reality of her choices. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. "I just wanted to be happy." It was Patricia who responded, her voice carrying the authority of a mother who had tried for years to help her daughter learn accountability. "Amanda, happiness built on lies and exploitation was never going to last," she said firmly. "These children deserved a mother who loved them. David deserved a wife who honored their marriage. And this family deserved honesty and respect. You chose selfish pleasure over responsibility, and now you're facing the consequences of those choices." The confrontation concluded with Amanda agreeing to temporary separation while legal proceedings began. She would stay with a friend while custody arrangements were formalized, with supervised visitation only after completing parenting classes and counseling. The financial theft charges would proceed through both civilian and military courts, and David would file for divorce with full custody of the children. But the most important outcome was that 4 innocent children finally understood they had value and worth beyond their usefulness to others. They learned that adults who truly loved them would fight for their well-being rather than exploit their vulnerability. And they discovered that families built on honesty and respect were possible, even after experiencing the chaos of manipulation and neglect. 6 months later, as I sit in my garden on a beautiful autumn afternoon, watching Marcus teach Emma how to plant bulbs for next spring's flowers, I am amazed by the transformation that has taken place in our family's life. The legal proceedings moved swiftly once Amanda's pattern of deception was fully exposed, but the emotional healing has been a longer, more gradual process that continues to unfold each day. Amanda faced multiple charges in both civilian and military courts. The financial fraud charges resulted in restitution requirements that will follow her for years, and her theft of military benefits led to additional federal charges that carry serious consequences. She lost all custody rights to the children, with only supervised visitation allowed after completing extensive counseling and parenting classes. The divorce was finalized within 4 months, with David receiving full custody and Amanda ordered to pay child support. A requirement that seemed ironic, given her years of exploiting others for financial gain. But perhaps the most significant consequence for Amanda was losing the relationships she had spent years manipulating. Patricia maintained firm boundaries, refusing to enable Amanda's behavior any longer, while still expressing love for her daughter and hope for her eventual rehabilitation. The military community, which had been one of Amanda's primary sources of emotional and financial exploitation, closed ranks to support David and the children, while making it clear that Amanda's manipulative behavior would no longer be tolerated. David extended his stateside assignment to focus on rebuilding his relationship with his children and creating the stable home environment they desperately needed. The children began therapy to address the emotional impacts of years of manipulation and neglect, but they also began to flourish in ways that amazed everyone who knew them. Marcus, freed from the burden of premature responsibility, rediscovered his childhood interests in science and baseball. Sophie's mathematics grades improved dramatically with consistent homework support, and she developed a love of reading that kept her curled up with books for hours at a time. The twins, Jake and Emma, stopped experiencing the anxiety-related physical symptoms that had been their constant companions, and their natural joy and curiosity began to emerge. My own role in the family evolved into something I had never expected but found deeply fulfilling. David purchased a house just 2 miles from mine, close enough for regular involvement but far enough to maintain healthy boundaries. I became the children's primary caregiver after school and during David's work commitments, but now it was a role based on mutual respect and genuine choice rather than manipulation and exploitation. The children learned what healthy family relationships looked like through consistent experiences rather than lectures. They discovered that asking for help was not selfish, that expressing their needs was not burdensome, and that love did not come with conditions or expectations of perfect behavior. They learned that adults who truly cared about them would prioritize their well-being over their own convenience. Amanda's journey toward accountability has been slower and more complicated. Initially, she continued to blame everyone else for the consequences of her choices. But the legal requirements for counseling and parenting classes gradually forced her to confront the impact of her behavior. Her relationship with her personal trainer ended quickly once her financial resources were depleted, and she found herself facing the reality of supporting herself without the ability to exploit others. Patricia maintains limited contact with Amanda, offering support for genuine efforts at rehabilitation while refusing to provide financial assistance or emotional validation for victim mentality. "I love my daughter," Patricia told me recently, "but I love her enough to let her face the consequences of her choices. That's the only way she'll ever learn to make better ones." The children's relationship with their mother remains complicated and will require years of therapeutic guidance to navigate properly. They understand that Amanda is their mother and that complex feelings about that relationship are normal and acceptable. But they also understand that they deserve to be treated with love and respect, and that family relationships should be based on mutual care rather than exploitation. For me, this experience has been a powerful reminder that retirement does not mean becoming passive or irrelevant. At 67, I discovered that I still had the strength and wisdom to protect the people I love from harm, even when that harm came from within our own family. I learned that kindness does not require accepting mistreatment, and that love sometimes means setting firm boundaries rather than endless accommodation. My garden, which I had planned to tend as a quiet hobby, has become a gathering place where grandchildren learn about growth, patience, and the importance of providing proper care for living things. The books I had planned to read alone are now shared with Sophie during our afternoon reading time. The volunteer work I had intended to pursue at the animal shelter has expanded to include mentoring other grandparents who find themselves navigating complex family situations. Most importantly, I learned that standing up for what is right does not make you selfish or difficult. It makes you strong. The lesson I taught Amanda was not primarily about punishment, but about the fact that actions have consequences and that people who truly love you will hold you accountable for behavior that harms yourself and others. As I watch my grandchildren play in the backyard, secure in their knowledge that they are valued and protected, I am filled with gratitude for the courage I found to challenge Amanda's manipulation and for the opportunity to show these children what real love looks like. They are learning that they have worth beyond their usefulness, that their needs and feelings matter, and that healthy families support each other through challenges rather than exploiting vulnerability for personal gain. This experience has also taught me the importance of community and the courage to ask for help when facing difficult situations. The support I received from Patricia, from David's military community, from my former colleagues, and from legal and therapeutic professionals reminded me that we do not have to face family crises alone. Sometimes protecting the people we love requires building alliances and seeking expertise beyond our own experience. I want to ask you something as we finish this story together. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone was taking advantage of your kindness or generosity? How did you find the courage to set boundaries while still maintaining your loving heart? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below, because I believe we can all learn from each other's experiences with difficult family relationships and the importance of protecting our own well-being while caring for others. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to hear more stories about family challenges, personal growth, and finding strength in difficult times. Share this story with someone who might need to hear the message that they have value and worth that should never be exploited by others, even family members. Thank you for listening to my story, and for being part of a community that believes in the importance of healthy relationships, personal accountability, and the courage to stand up for what is right. May you find the strength to protect your own well-being and the wisdom to know when love requires setting firm boundaries rather than endless accommodation. Remember, you are valuable beyond your usefulness to others, and you deserve relationships built on respect, honesty, and genuine care.